Hi, team, and welcome to our next vodcast on imperialism. Today, we're going to be looking at the ways that the United States is going to expand. So, different types of imperialism, one being a sphere of influence where a country has control over another country's economy. So, we're going to be looking at opening up trade with the Japanese and the Chinese. This Treaty of Kanagawa is important for us historically, not only during imperialism, but it's the beginning of our relationship with the Japanese. Basically, what this treaty says is that the United States is going to come in, have access to Japanese ports, and in return, the Japanese are going to buy American goods, which is great and helpful for us. And in return, the United States is going to help them industrialize. We are going to help them move from a third world country towards a first world country. We're also going to open up trade in China. China, we know, has been trading with many other European countries like Great Britain and France. You probably spoke specifically about the relationship between Great Britain and China, where Great Britain wanted tea. They wanted access to Chinese tea. And so they started trading opium and drugs to the Chinese. And in return, the Chinese were exporting tea to the British. So when we talk about a sphere of influence, this is not usually a mutual relationship. This is usually one country coming in and taking over another and controlling who a country is allowed, the one that's being controlled, who they're allowed to trade with. So the Japanese and the Chinese would be examples of American spheres of influence. The United States is controlling the economies of both Japan and China because we're controlling who they are allowed to trade with, right? How they're able to make their money, who they're selling their goods to. So why is the United States interested in Japan and China when they're on the other side of the world? It's because the United States is looking for new markets. We're starting to trade in South America, but we're also looking to expand across the Pacific Ocean. We also have access now to a much larger Navy. There was a book that was written called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History by Alfred T. Mahan, who's an admiral in the American Navy. And he is going to convince President McKinley at the time, who's before President Roosevelt, that it's best for the American government to allocate more funds to the Navy to expand the number of ships that we have so that we could be prepared in case there ever were to be a war. And we create one of the marvels of our time, which is going to be the USS Maine. This ship is symbolic of American power. It's symbolic of our journey to become imperialist nation. It is like the pride of the United States. It would travel from port to port around the US and people would gather, they'd go down and watch the USS Maine just float by, which, also tells you a lot about what people are doing socially. But we are just so proud and so excited that the USS Maine existed. This ship is going to be important for us as we start talking about the start of the Spanish-American War. So we look at this map and we can recognize that Japan and China are very far away from the United States. This is a long journey. So we need to now think about the Hawaiian Islands, right? This is going to be a stopping point for the United States, for our sailors, also to refuel our ships. If we were able to create a military base here maybe one day, that military base will be Pearl Harbor, which will be important to us again at the start of World War II. But we want to have control over the Hawaiian Islands. This process is actually going to be one of our first examples of externally, right, outside of the United States, kicking out the natives and requiring them to live under American standards, right? We did this to the Native Americans when we arrived in America, but now it's going to be outside of the confines of North America. So with the annexation of Hawaii, it starts with what we call a reciprocal trade agreement. The Hawaiians were selling sugar. They have a lot of sugar farms, and we made an agreement with them that they could only sell their sugar to the United States. So a sphere of influence it started with. We controlled their economy. We sent missionaries in who trained the native Hawaiian people to learn how to speak English. We educated them. We taught them religion. And so there was this elite group of people who went to American schools within Hawaii who were Hawaiian natives. As this starts to happen, the missionaries who originally went to Hawaii, they start having families, raising children, and that younger generation of missionaries, the children of the original missionaries, decide that they want more of a say in the government. They don't want to just live there and support the Hawaiians. They want to be a part of the government. They want to have a say. And so they forced the king at the time to sign a new constitution. And we call this constitution a bayonet constitution. American missionaries forced the king at bayonet, at knife point, right at the end of a gun, to sign this new constitution, basically allowing the Americans who live in Hawaii to run the government, making the king and the queen figureheads of the government, no longer in power. So the king eventually is going to pass away. The one who signed this constitution is going to pass away, and his sister, named Queen Liliuokalani, is going to decide that she wants the power back of the monarchy. She doesn't want to be some servant who sits there as a figurehead. She wants to bring this country back to the natives, back to her people. And so she starts to make a plan. She doesn't have a revolution. She doesn't actually get that far. But there's a group of people, Hawaiian people, who go rogue. They start to import guns. They start to organize. And the missionaries, the Americans, start to get wind of this. They arrest the queen because they assume that it's her doing. They put her in jail. And this is where things really start to kind of expand. Americans now come in to investigate whether or not the monarchy should be restored. And they write this document that's like 1,000 pages, interviewing Hawaiians, interviewing missionaries, and they decide that it's not the right thing. It's not the right thing for the Hawaiian people to have to live under American control, right? The people who did the investigations. So Queen Liliuokalani she's psyched. She's thinking she's getting her country back. But what ends up happening is that the American government decides, you know what? Actually, it's more important for us to have access to these ports. We can't guarantee it if we don't take them and make them a part of our empire. And so we annex Hawaii. We take Hawaii. By the summer of 1898, so right before the Spanish-American War begins, Hawaii becomes a part of the United States. It becomes a colony. It will eventually become a state. But right now, as of 1898, Hawaii now is controlled by the United States as a colony of the United States. Okay, so that's the annexation of Hawaii in kind of a really quick nutshell there. But long story short is that we start with missionaries, we start by trade, eventually we start to work into their government, and then a final takeover where we decide that it's not enough for us to have an agreement of trade. We need to have all the power, and so we take it. All right, so that is the expansion of our military, and this is the annexation of Hawaii. So we're going to stop here. I hope you have a great night.